Okay, so we are recording. Nice to see you all. Welcome to our first session of The Good Place, Deep Theology Hidden in a TV Smash Hit. Now, there are lots of reviews you can see of this show. There's lots of articles written, even everywhere from the Hollywood Reporter to the Christian Science Monitor and everywhere in between really got obsessed with this show. And the truth is that they were not offending anyone. They very intentionally went out of their way to not really focus on any one religious tradition. In fact, God is not mentioned ever in the show. And that's actually one of the points that I'm going to try to make tonight through a couple of the clips, is that I believe that a version of God is present in the show. They won't call God by that name, though. That it's a specifically Jewish theology, actually, that informs that part of the show. So we'll get to that. But before we do, I wanted to just start with this. The Good Place. It is described as not only clever and endearing and weird and fun, but also a deeper meditation on what it means to be a good person and how and when that goodness can be rewarded. So we are going to focus for the next 4 weeks, although we have to skip next week for the board meeting, on the issue of the afterlife. This is the main setting for the TV show. And it's a question, ultimately, of what happens after we die. One of the great questions, you might argue, that every religious tradition, since the beginning of time, has tried to address. I like to think of there being three big questions. One is, where do we come from? The second is, what happens after we die? The third, of course, is, why are we here? And those three questions form a great deal of the foundation for many religious traditions. Of course, tonight we're going to focus on the Jewish tradition. So let me see. I'm going to get back now to our PowerPoint. I'm going to try to go back and forth the PowerPoint. The Good Place. Jewish and other theologies in 4 seasons of the show. Tonight we'll be looking mostly at season 1, but we will be ruining the end of season 1 if you are aware of it. So I wanted to just first start by exploring a little bit of traditional Jewish text with you on the afterlife. What is it that Jews believe? And of course, that's always a really dangerous expression. And it's a question that we all get asked, I'm sure, many times. And that is, what do Jews believe about the afterlife? It's complicated because there truly is not one thread of Jewish belief on the subject. In fact, you could argue that Judaism writ large is much less concerned about belief. In fact, some of the scholars even say you can't teach somebody what to believe. Belief is just inherent in every person. And rather we focus on behavior, because you can affect behavior. And then one could argue that the behavior will actually influence the belief, perhaps. But even if you were going to try to answer the question of what do Jews believe about the afterlife, it would perhaps be impossible. There are as many opinions as there are Jews. I do think, however, that there are some really common threads, and they will resonate with us less or more, but these are the texts that we're given. So the earliest mention of the afterlife is this quote from Kohelet, from Ecclesiastes. Now, Ecclesiastes is a book written from the perspective of somebody who is at the end of life and contemplating not only what lies ahead of that person, but really more obsessed with looking backwards and trying to find meaning in the life that is basically coming to conclusion. And this one quote, I think, has a lot in it. The dust returns to the earth where it once was. The soul returns to God who gave it. Ecclesiastes has been accused of being a rather depressing author, but I do not necessarily find that in reading the whole book. But I just want to point out a couple of things here. Whether or not this is seen as a pessimistic or an optimistic view, there are a couple of realities that are present here. First of all, there is this dual nature of humanity, a recognition throughout the Bible, especially as articulated here, that we have these two pieces of our being, that we are, in the words of Adam and Eve, we are but dust and ashes. Actually, no, that's not Adam and Eve, that's Abraham. Abraham, I am but dust and ashes. There's a recognition that we are physical beings, we are part of the natural world, and we know from empirical evidence that when we die, that part of our being stays here. It is returned to the earth, which is also where the Jewish custom comes from, that you bury somebody in an entirely biodegradable way, because we are intent on returning to the earth. We also have this other part of our being that we call the soul. That is a very complicated term, and we're really not going to be able to dive too deeply into that. But for the sake of this class, just a recognition that it is separate from our physical being, and that it is eternal, that it returns to God who gave it. The soul lives on, the dust returns to the earth. That really does form the foundation of a Jewish perspective on the afterlife. Let me show you another bit of text. This is from Genesis chapter 25. We are getting into a specific story now. This is about Abraham. This is the recording of Abraham's death. Now, the Bible, anytime you take the Bible too literally, and I do mean anytime, you are entering a minefield, because the Bible was written in a particular place and time, and it is full of not only alliteration and euphemism and metaphor, but it also is it points us towards a specific worldview that we no longer know about. So in this situation, we don't know exactly when the story is written, and we don't know much about the person who wrote it down. But here's what the text says. Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age, an old man, full of years. That's the expression. And then it says he was gathered to his people. So could that be just an expression, a way that they talk about death, in the same way that in a modern time I might say he's in a better place when someone dies? Perhaps it's just an expression, but I would argue that those expressions that we use are filled with meaning. They are rich in theology. When I say that someone is at peace now, they are no longer in pain, and that they are in a better place, I'm expressing a tremendous amount of hope, a wish, a prayer that what lies beyond is something peaceful and something holistic. And in this situation, the author believed or just stated that Abraham was reunited with some kind of communal experience, perhaps even his ancestors. So this is not, it would not be fair to extrapolate from this and say, well, Jews believe that you are reunited with your loved ones when you die, but the expression is there. I'll show you another version of this. This is when Moses dies at the end of Deuteronomy. The expression that God uses is, Moses, behold, you are about to sleep with your ancestors. I think more overtly saying, when you die, you are reunited with your family. So okay, I do want to just mention those because it really does lay a foundation. there basically ends up being two uh, concepts, Jewish concepts of the afterlife. The first is the idea of what you might call heaven. And I think Moses is there. I think that Abraham is there with these expressions. You go to another place, an other place. In Hebrew, it is called Olam Haba, the world to come. And it is that expression is used throughout the centuries to mean various things. What does that other world look like? That we are much less clear about. Some would argue that Olam Haba is actually an expression used for the world we are in now, that our job is to make the world now into Olam Haba. But when we talk about someone dying and going to Olam Haba, that is not generally we're not talking about this world. We're talking about another place. And because we know that the body stays here in this world, then Olam Haba is a place of spirit. It is a place where we do not have corporeality. And because we don't have corporeality, we don't eat, we don't drink, we don't have sex. So that world, that Olam Haba, the Jewish view would be that it is some form of spirit. And you'll see all sorts of metaphors. You know, we will be united with God in the kingdom, and we will sit at the foot of God's throne. Those kinds of things are not to be taken literally. It is a spiritual statement, and Jews are very poetic when it comes to those spiritual statements. Okay, the other concept, Olam Haba, is one, and the other, of course, you're somewhat familiar with, I'm sure, is the idea of Mashiach, which means Messiah. In contemporary Judaism, many of our denominations, of course, have replaced the idea of a personal Messiah, that is a man or an individual who is going to transform the world overnight, and we talk more about a messianic age and how we get there, what it looks like when we get there. Those are the subject of much debate. But the idea is that we can arrive at a perfected world and that we would live in that world for eternity. That's the idea of the Messiah or a messianic age. Either one. It's that this world is a stop along the way, but that what we are doing is moving this world towards a perfected world. Now, I just want to point out to you that these two ideas are somewhat incompatible. That is, if you believe that we are spending eternity here in a messianic age, in a perfected world, that is different than saying we are spending eternity in Olam Haba, in another place, not a physical place, in a place of spirit. That tension is really not resolved anywhere. So Susan is going to love that. It's unresolved tension, just like everything else. But these are the two great Jewish concepts. And of course, other religious traditions have picked up on it too. Okay, so I'm going to share with you, what's this one? Okay, yeah, so this is Maimonides, who is the authority on the subject because he made himself the authority on the subject. And I think some of you may have studied several years ago. We looked at this book in particular. The laws of repentance for Maimonides begin with a conversation about life and death, because for him, the idea of repentance is built in, it's baked into the system. You cannot have repentance unless we have free will, we make mistakes, we repent of them, and we die. That's actually going to be very, very important when we get to the clips, and we'll get to that later. Wait, why? Nina, are you here? Nina is joining twice. I'm going to try to monitor the waiting room while we're going through this. Okay, so here is Maimonides. It's a long book. When we did study it, we took all summer to get through the 10 chapters of the laws of repentance, Hilchot Teshuvah. But just to suffice it to say, we're going to look at like 3 or 4 quotes. He says, the early sages informed us that we have no ability to grasp the good of Olam Haba clearly. We just cannot know its greatness, its beauty, and its essence. God alone can. Maimonides' point is that as human beings, we are necessarily limited in our understanding of the world, and specifically this issue of what comes after the world. We just cannot comprehend it. And I have a favorite analogy for this. Some of you may have heard this from me before. I imagine trying to explain to an unborn child in the mother's womb. I try to imagine explaining to that child, that fetus, what this world is like. From that person's experience in the womb, how to explain what things look like, what things sound like, what things smell like. I would recognize that when that person emerged into the world, was born into the world, that it would be a very traumatic experience. It could be very scary. It could be terrifying because there were so many new sights and sounds. Their consciousness would have expanded in a moment to recognize crying, to recognize breathing, to recognize other people in a very different way. It would be impossible to explain to that fetus what this world would look like. But at the end of the day, it would be important to recognize that this world is good. We would say to that fetus, you know what? You may not be able to know what's coming, but it's good. There'll be challenges, there'll be struggle, there might be pain, but it is good. I don't see why we then would not assume that the next transition from this world to the next would not all be the same. We are limited in our capacity to understand. We cannot know the greatness, the beauty, and the essence of it, but we know that it is there, or we believe that it is there. That's a Jewish belief as well. Oh, I did this twice. Okay. So I also want to point out one other philosopher. This is fast forwarding in Jewish history quite a bit. But Franz Rosenzweig writes in The Star of Redemption, which is his great treatise that really begins with this question. He wants to know, you know, how do we feel about life and death? How do we understand life and death? And that will help us explain all of Jewish philosophy, all of Jewish ritual, according to Rosenzweig. He sums that up in one of the first statements from this book. All knowledge of the universe begins with death. And specifically, he says, all knowledge of our universe begins with this fear of death, with this uncertainty that we have about what comes next. Okay, let's see. I am going to now use that as a way to introduce the show. I'm going to try to intersperse, I think, about 6 different clips of the show for you. And let's see. I have to stop sharing this. Oh, this is going to be tricky. Where's my technical assistance here? Okay. So I don't think I can get them all up at the same time. But this is from the very beginning of the show, episode 1. You know what I'd like to do first is, if I can see who's here, if you know how to do that. Oh, I actually think I can see all of you. I'd love for you to raise your hand if you have watched the show. Who has seen the big chunk, most of the show, let's say, even if you haven't finished the whole thing? So not everyone. All right, so I do want to just kind of lay the foundation for you. This show is a little quirky and a little weird, as I said. So this will help kind of set the stage. But I also want us to pay attention to the theology that is underlying this show. So here I go. I'm going to show you a clip. I'm going to share the sound so that you can hear it. And let's see if this works. It's not the very beginning of the show, but this occurs right at the first scene.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to your first day in the afterlife. You are all, simply put, good people. But how do we know that you are good? How are we sure? During your time on Earth, Every one of your actions had a positive or a negative value, depending on how much good or bad that action put into the universe. Every sandwich you ate, every time you bought a magazine, every single thing you did had an effect that rippled out over time and ultimately created some amount of good or bad. You know how some people pull into the breakdown lane when there's traffic and they think to themselves, who cares? No one's watching. We were watching.
Okay, so lays it out a little bit in oversimplification. I actually think one of the pieces that is really brilliant about this show is that they do manage to cram a lot of very deep theology into the show, but they keep it very light. It's a very simple premise, and that is that you are judged in this afterlife by your actions here on earth. Pretty simple, right? And it's actually a uh, very familiar perspective if we look at our Jewish text. Here's Maimonides again, 12th century, 1100s, and he writes again in the same book, The Laws of Repentance, each and every person has merits as well as sins. Somebody whose merits outnumber their sins is considered to be righteous. Now, this may be it may be even too oversimplified, but stick with me. And I know if you've studied this with me before, there's more to it than meets the eye. Somebody who has more sins than merits is a wicked person. And somebody who has equal amounts of merits and sins is an average person. What he's saying there is that average means that that's the majority, that's the bell curve. Most of us have equal amounts of merits and sins. Righteousness is when one's merits are more numerous than one's sins, and wickedness is when one's sins are more numerous. And then he says the whole world operates on this principle. Now, I know that it seems very, very simple, but just pay attention to a couple of points here. And then I'm going to try to use the chat for this so that we can, have a little bit of participation. It's not just me talking at you. What he is assuming here, that even in contemporary moral philosophy it's a debate, is that you can call something righteous and that will equate to something being good. In other words, we recognize that good deeds, the things that you do that make that as the character says there, we'll explain in a minute, says puts good out into the universe, that is also good for you, that makes you a righteous person. In other words, what you are judged on, the role of being a good person on earth it's related to your actions on earth. And so I did that little equation at the bottom, that it's really in Judaism, it's about piety. It is about your observance, your actions here on earth. When you do good deeds, that makes you righteous. And I don't think that's so simple. Okay, but it is what in the show they're going to call the point system. Very simple, right? You just earn enough points and you get into what they're going to call the good place. Somebody wrote in the chat and I can't see the chat. One moment. Oh, there we go. Oh, Marcia Marv. Some sins are definite sins, and some of them are perspective. Okay, this is a very important point. I'm assuming Marcia said that or wrote that, only because I can see your face. No, it's Marv. Let's unmute you. Feel free to unmute and jump in here. All right, so before you do though, what you're pointing out here is that even in the simple equation of this is good and this is bad, we know that life is shades of gray, that there are some things that we would all consider to be sinful, evil, destructive, but that there are other things that we may not agree. There is the idea of, a universal ethics versus particularism, which says that my ethics may not be your ethics. And Kat says, according to the faith tradition, there can be difference, and this is a righteous action, this is not. The show is assuming a universal ethics. That is, that according to the system, every action has a completely objective, and they will argue in the show, a perfected system that tallies the exact number of points that you receive or that you lose on every action. And if you paid attention to the clip there's some really funny examples in there. I just happened to notice this time one that I'd not seen before, that blowing your nose by holding one nostril closed and just breathing hard through the other one was negative 1.44 points. I just happened to notice that one. And I do think that that is a Jewish concept, this idea of universal ethics and morality, that that we may not be aware of them. We may have our different perspectives on morality, but that when you get to the next world, it is clear. In other words, from a Jewish perspective, God does have a calculus and it's all figured out, even though we may not have a perspective on it. So yes, it's true that there are, even in some cases, something that's we would consider most heinous, like murder, but that is justified. Not just, Pinchas being, righteously killing people, but, consider the fact in our world of war. We could argue till the cows come home about which wars are justified and which wars are not. But the Torah does recognize that there are both. There are some wars that are justified and actually we are obligated to go to war, and then there are some wars that are not. Okay, let's see. I'm going to go back to the slideshow now. Oh, I do just want to mention that, when we're talking about theology, it's important for us to talk about the specifics of Jewish theology, but also, and I think more and more, I find that contemporary Jews embrace this idea, and that is about reincarnation. So I just included a little bit of that. It's going to be an important part of the TV show. Do we believe as Jews in reincarnation? The true answer is that idea has been rejected by just about every Jewish authority for a long, long time, for centuries. However, the idea has been embraced by mystical Judaism and the Kabbalists. The idea that we are on what in Hebrew is called a Gilgul, which is a circle. And it's very close to the Hindu definition of reincarnation, of the transmigration of the soul, that we go from life to life. So there are a few quotes that mention that in the Torah. In the book of Job, this quote, which is much debate over in the classical commentary, but some would argue this mentions reincarnation. Truly, God does all these things 2 or 3 times to a person to bring them back from the pit and let them bask in the light of life. Now, Job is not about reincarnation. It's a little out of context to think of it that way. But, perhaps, let me see. Yes. So actually, I'll mention to you that I did write it down. The classical commentary that argues that this quote is about reincarnation is Rambam, Nachmanides, who says that this is about reincarnation, even though he's sort of on his own to do that. The other place where you'll find it in Jewish theology is especially as a justification for the presence of evil in the world. Specifically, I'll give you an example. When we think about the death of children, which is one of the most difficult things to resolve in a theological sense. If there is a God, how could God see it as a just action to take the life of a child? Now, of course, there are other responses to that question, but in classical Judaism, this is where reincarnation has come in. They have said, well, it must be that even a child has accumulated sin, even if it is in a past life. And I have actually heard this. It's as horrible as I think it is personally. I think it was Ovadia Yosef actually who argued that this explained the children who were murdered in the Holocaust. That those children did nothing wrong in their lives, but justice still prevailed, and that they were paying for sins from past lives. I do not agree with that theology, but in The Good Place, they are going to get rebooted over and over again, if you know the show, and that's going to be important. Okay, so we'll get to that. Perhaps the most Jewish of all concepts in the show is the belief in justice. That, and let's see if I have that here. Where did I put it? No, I don't have it there. But this underlines the entire show. The characters find themselves in what turns out to be a very skewed system. But throughout the show, they will argue that there should be, if there isn't, some standard that exists above and transcends whatever system they're a part of. So what you saw in the clip, for example, was a town square, people sitting in chairs, they're watching a movie, and they're understanding that there is this point system that has led them to the good place. But this show is going to argue that even that system is broken, it is imperfect, and that there is a higher standard, something that no character really owns. Even the most powerful characters in the show who come on later, they do not determine what justice is. Justice just exists in the show. So this sets up my next clip before we get back to Job. The idea of justice. Let me just say very quickly. So the first character you saw in the show, that's Ted Danson's character. He plays in this scene what he calls himself the architect. He is a transcendent heavenly being. I'll say that in as neutral a way as I can. We'll find out later that he's actually a demon, but he is a heavenly being, and he has created this neighborhood for those who have died recently, and for whom this is going to be the good place. Yes, and they have, I believe they said 122 frozen yogurt stands in the good place. Now, whether that's heaven or that's hell depends on your perspective. Jennifer thinks it's hell. And there are clowns there too, but I don't think I have that in the clip, Kat. Okay, let me show you the part that I think is interesting. These are the main two characters. Eleanor, who is played, wait a minute, where'd it go? Oh, sorry, a second. The two characters are Eleanor and Chidi. One of them seems to belong in the good place, and one of them thinks it's a mistake that she is there. Here we go. Let's just face it, Eleanor, you don't. Oh, I wish there was an easy way to do this. All right, so Eleanor has awoken to this place. She realizes right away that she doesn't belong there. And in fact, it seems like her presence is sort of altering the reality around them. She's causing blips in the system. She's causing errors to occur. So you'll notice that Chidi's clothes, even they're not functioning the way they should. And it's clear it's because Eleanor perhaps does not belong there. Okay, here we go. Let's just
face it, Eleanor, you don't belong here.
Well, then this system sucks. What, 1 in a million gets to live in paradise and everyone else is tortured for eternity? Come on. I mean, I wasn't freaking Gandhi, but I was okay. I was a medium person. I should get to spend eternity in a medium place, like Cincinnati. Everyone who wasn't perfect but wasn't terrible should get to spend eternity in Cincinnati.
Look, apparently it doesn't work that way. I'm sorry, Eleanor, but there's nothing anyone can do.
Unless there is something we can do, unless you could teach me.
Teach you what?
How to be good. That was your job, right? A professor of ethics? No one knew I was a problem when I arrived. Things only started getting crazy after I was an ashhole to everyone at the party. Ugh! You know I'm trying to say ashhole and not ashhole, right?
I got that, yes.
Okay, give me a chance. Let me earn my place here. Let me be your ethical guinea pig.
Hey guys, emergency neighborhood meeting now.
We'll be right there, Michael. If I walk out of here in these clothes, I'm toast. My soul is in your hands, soulmate. What's it gonna be?
Oh, stomachache.
Fremulon.
Okay, so a couple of things I do want to mention. Number one, you should be prepared for a little bit of foul language, although not really, because in the good place, apparently you are not allowed to curse, although Eleanor tries valiantly to use foul language. Also, her idea is that the system as it's set up, that there is a good place and there's a bad place, seems to be unjust to her. And partially that's because the numbers seem to suggest that a very, very few people are going to get into this good place and that she only got in by accident. The more we see of her life on earth, the more it seems to be that she really was not a medium person. She was a terrible person. But there is a difference in her mind between her actions on earth, which I think she would even agree were awful, and the person that she is inside, her intentions. She would argue that her intentions were always good, and that deep down she was a good person, even though her behavior did not ever suggest that. It becomes really obvious why she does not belong there. But the idea of a medium place is going to be a theme throughout. This idea is, simply put, that that the system is unjust. That to say there is a good place, which they never call heaven, and that to say there's a bad place, and that you are either in paradise for eternity or you are damned forever to torture and hell, that in and of itself seems unjust. And that is a concept that appears in many different moral philosophies. But I want to mention it in terms of what we just learned about Maimonides, because Maimonides is suggesting to us that if you have more good deeds in your life than you have sin, that you're righteous. And he's suggesting if you have more sin in your life than good deeds, then you are wicked. And those are the two really easy categories. But if you've studied the book with me, you know that it gets a lot more complicated, because what he's suggesting, and I emphasize this for you, was that an average person does not fall in one of those extremes. An average person, according to Maimonides, was a person whose merits, whose good deeds, is equal to their bad deeds. And he'll prove later in chapter 3 of Hilchot Teshuvah that truly is the way that we should all see ourselves. That even those of us who consider ourselves to be righteous, we're not that righteous. We have some sin to account for. And even the person who is really down on themselves and considers themselves to be a terrible person, you have more righteousness in you than you are giving yourself credit for. And that an average person, again, that's the bulk of us, the majority of the bell curve, that we are in that middle. In fact, he's suggesting that we, even if it's artificial, that we are supposed to see ourselves as that medium person. It's not an exact calculus, according to Maimonides. He says, if you imagine yourselves as having an equal amount of righteous deeds and of sins, if you are that medium person exactly, then that is actually the most powerful place to be. And for Maimonides, that is the human experience. It's important for two reasons. One is that it really does balance us all out. When we all come to the High Holy Days, for example, and we try to sit together in prayer, if we are all average people, if we all have balanced scales, then we all have a place there. We are all justified in being there together. No one of us is better than the other. And the second thing that is really significant, according to Maimonides, is that if your scales are balanced, it means that the very next action you take, whether it's a good action or a bad action, whether it's worth 1.44 points or 1 million points, that action will tip the scales. That one action has all of the power in the universe because your scales are, before that action, they are balanced perfectly. What he's doing is assigning tremendous importance to every single action you take. And that's clearly what the point of the show is. I love her idea of a medium place that's going to play out in important ways. The other thing that is introduced in this clip is this idea that even if she doesn't belong there, that she's going to fight for it. And the way she's going to fight for it is to try to better herself. This is perhaps the most direct steal, from Jewish philosophy. They're suggesting that the point of this place is not just to be judgment and not just to be eternity, either in perfect utopia or a dystopian nightmare, but rather to continue this process of improving yourself, that it's always possible, and that it is the point, it is the goal of human behavior. And what we'll find out later in the show is that the real system should be how much has this person improved, and not how objectively righteous or evil they are. Okay. All right, let's just go back to Job for a moment. Job is an interesting book. I had a professor who taught us Job in seminary who said that if she could only take two books with her to a desert island, one would be Song of Songs and the other would be the book of Job. And she says everything is contained within those two books. Here's her point of the book of Job, I think. So if you're familiar with the book, Job has every possible bad thing happen to him. Everything is taken away from him. And then the chapters that follow, four friends, come to visit him. And they explore together, why is this happening? It is truly an entire treatise just examining the question of why do bad things happen to good people. In fact, the book that you may be familiar with by Harold Kushner, titled When Bad Things Happen to Good People, that was his thesis that was about Job. That was him writing about Job. And his follow-up to the book, which just came out, I think, 5 or 10 years ago, is literally about Job, and it's called When Bad Things Happen to a Good Person. And it's a study of the book of Job. And here's the basic summary. These three friends, we're going to leave the fourth friend out of it for a moment. The three friends that form the bulk of the book who approach their friend Job, they represent the three great human philosophical thoughts about why bad things happen. The first friend, Eliphaz, comes forward and argues with Job that if these bad things are happening to him, that it's because he deserves it. He may not know what he's done to deserve it, but he does. that there is justice in the universe and that you get what you deserve. In other words, he's saying, Job, you may not have been as righteous as you think. The second friend comes along, Bildad, and says, you know what, Job, this is a test. Bad things happen to you because it is a test. And if you pass that test, then you'll be okay. Personally, I don't find much comfort in that idea in my own life or in the lives in the modern world, the way that we look at this question. But it is a classic answer to the question. And then, of course, the third friend, Zophar, comes along and says, well, there is no reason. Life is just random. The fourth friend comes along and really does answer the question. The fourth friend comes along and says, who are you to ask for meaning? Where were you when God created the world? How dare you think that you have the right to understand it? You don't have the right to understand it. It just happens that way. And that's the end of the book. It actually ends on that question. Where were you when I created the world? If those are the three responses to evil in the world, they also will give us the reasons for why we might be good people, what it means to be a good person, to live a good life. The first friend, Eliphaz, who says you deserve your suffering. Therefore, according to that theory, you avoid suffering by doing good things. In other words, you do good things because of your self-interest. You'd like to avoid suffering. And that would be a reason to do good in the world. If you follow the second theory, Bildad says that it's all a test, that life is all a test. Well, then, why do good in the world? It's because we'd like to pass the test. We want this reward that is waiting for us. And the reward happens immediately, according to Bildad. If we are righteous people, if we do good, then we get rewarded for it. According to the life is random philosophy, that's where things get interesting. And this is where the show is going to pick it up. If suffering is random, and if there's truly nothing we can do that will help us understand how to be good people, then we are left with the question, why do good things? How do we understand what goodness is and why we should do it? And that leads us to the theories of moral philosophy. So Chidi, the character we've met, he is a professor of ethics and moral philosophy. Many jokes at his expense of being a professor of moral philosophy. Everything is a conversation. Everything is a debate. Everything has moral shades of gray. And that's actually his downfall, that he is completely indecisive. His thesis on moral philosophy, anyone know how many pages it was? Something like 3,000 pages that he's written. And it's incomprehensible even to Michael, the divine being who knows everything there is to know. Chidi's manuscript is unreadable. That's the danger of getting into moral philosophy. But it's through that joking about him as a professor that we really come to the meat of the show. The show presents two different concepts of moral philosophy, utilitarianism and contractualism. The utilitarian view is that the reason in a world that is devoid of meaning, the reason why you do good is that you are hoping to benefit from it the most people. In other words, we have inherently a desire to do the most good for the most people. That's how I decide whether an action is righteous or not. And contractualism is actually the philosophy that really undergirds the show, is the basic concept that we have entered into a social contract, you and I. You might call it a brit, a covenant, a contract that says that we all get to make the rules together, and therefore the rules are going to work for everyone. Everyone gets a vote on them. And because there is no other meaning in the world, what we end up with is these responsibilities, these obligations to one another. Okay, so I'm going to just, that's all we're going to do about these moral philosophies. You are welcome to look them up on your own. But all of these lead to a simple concept that I mentioned before, and that is that the point of life, the point of doing good, is to make yourself a better person, to just wake up today and do better than you did yesterday. So that's going to set up the next video. And let's see, I want to set up what is happening in this video. Ah, yes, okay. So we're introduced to two other characters. There's actually four human characters in the story, and they are all realizing that Eleanor, at least, is a problematic figure in the good place. They think they're in the good place. They think they've all earned enough points to be there. And what are they going to do about Eleanor? Are they going to just throw her to the wolves and let her head to the bad place? Or is there some way they can save her? And they come up with an interesting idea. So here it is.
I accidentally saw these point totals when Michael was fixing a sinkhole. It gave me an idea. We will apply the formula to Eleanor's actions here in the good place, and if you earn enough new points, then we could argue that you should stay here. Would that work?
Don't know. Never had to prove someone belonged here before. But the judge will be here soon, and this is the best way to build our case. Now, the average point total for a resident here is roughly 1.2 million. Right now, based on everything that you did on Earth, you have negative 4,008.
That's not great. But I'm gonna do nice things for every goober in this place until my point total is so high I can rub it in all their smug faces.
You just lost 5 points.
It's a very funny show. I will tell you that. In fact, the book, I'll show you this book. I found this for my daughter when I realized she was obsessed with it. I actually have two. This is the one. It's called The Good Place and Philosophy. And the other book I found that is less, it's a little bit more dry. The Forking Trolley, An Ethical Journey to the Good Place. So if you're interested, this is the one that is actually written by the two philosophers who were the consultants for the show. And here's how they start. I couldn't figure out how to fit this quote in, but I'll just give it to you now. This is the first sentence of the introduction. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein once remarked that, quote, a serious and good philosophical work could be written consisting entirely of jokes. There is a lot you can learn from the way that we joke about this. So, for example, that scene, in my mind, is about something very, very serious, and that is motivation. Eleanor has a serious deficit to get from negative 4,000. I mean, who knows what these points are really worth? From negative 4,000 to 1.2 million, that seems to be an impossible task, especially because it seems like it's already signed and sealed and delivered. She is already dead. Can she even earn more points? Does it matter what kind of person she is in the afterlife if she was a terrible person in life? So what comes about there is this idea of intention and motivation. And what we're going to find out is that not only she can't earn more points in the good place, but also that the other character, the woman that was suggesting this, the whole reason she's there to begin with is that her intentions, her motivations through life were less than pure. Moral desert. I love that. So let me show you how that works in Jewish text. This is a little shorter because then we're going to get one minute. What did I do with it? There we go. Oh, I did not include a slide on this. I'm just going to read it to you. This is also from Hilchot Tshuva, the laws of repentance. Maimonides is talking about motivation. He says a person should not say, I will fulfill mitzvot of the Torah, I will occupy myself with its wisdom in order to receive all the blessings that are contained within it, or in order to merit the life of the world to come. A person whose service is motivated by those factors is considered one who serves out of fear. In other words, you're just afraid of the consequences. That's not really coming from a good place. He continues, they are not on the level of the prophets or of the wise. The people who serve God in this manner are commoners, for heaven forbid, and minors. They are trained to serve God out of fear only until their knowledge increases, and then they serve out of love. Motivation matters. That matters in Judaism, and it's going to matter to Eleanor and Tahani, right? Tony writes, Tahani is the most soul punchy for me. Oh, I relate to the family dynamic so much. So Tahani's backstory, if you're not familiar, is very, very complicated, and the end of the story is that all four of those characters are in the wrong place. And we're going to save that for our next class in 2 weeks. Here is another text I wanted to share with you about it, just briefly, about this idea of motivation, and it's from the Zohar. As I mentioned, it's the Kabbalists the mystical teachings where they really focused in on these issues. So in the Zohar, we read, there are 3 types of fear. A man may fear God in order that his sons may live and not die, or he's afraid of some punishment. But it follows that that person's fear is not the proper fear. There's another type of fear, a person who fears God because he is terrified of punishment in the next world, in dread of Olam Haba. But this type of fear also does not belong in the foundation of what we mean as fear, into its root meaning. And of course, we know that the word fear in Hebrew is yirah, which also means awe. Not fear necessarily in a negative sense, but this idea of trembling before the greatness of the Almighty. The Zohar continues this mystical teaching. The fear which does build a proper foundation is when a person fears their creator because they are great and mighty, the ruler, the foundation, the root of all worlds. And before God, all are as nothing. As it is written, and there's a quote from the book of Daniel, that all the inhabitants of the earth are nothing compared to the divine. Motivation is going to matter. If we are motivated out of fear, the fear of eternal damnation, the fear of going to hell, that is not enough to keep us from it. Aaron writes, Jill writes, yeah, basic. Appreciate that, Jill. Aaron writes, would you say Rambam's ladder is relevant here? Rambam's ladder is the levels of giving. The lower levels of giving say that you could give, but you give begrudgingly. That is a lower form of giving. But if you give willingly and even give before it is asked for, those are higher levels of giving. So what do we do with people who do kind things, do charitable things on video just to be famous? I think, again, the answer is going to be their motivation, right? If they are motivated by fame, which is not something we could tell from the outside, but that's going to be a lesser motivation than someone who's motivated by righteousness. Chris writes, isn't it still important to do good things, even if the motivation is wrong? And that's Rambam's ladder too. It's still good to give in that way, but according to the show, it's not going to get you points. Isn't it still important to do good things even if the motivation is wrong, since the doing can lead to the correct motivation instead of the other way around? So here's the Jewish response to that. We're going to have to wait to see what the show makes of that question. The Jewish motivation is that the only thing you can control is yourself. And that if you are giving, like Tahani, right? If you're giving and your whole life is filled with giving, but that you have not grown as a human being, you have not realized your potential as a human being, then that's the limitation. Now, whether or not that would keep you out of a heaven or hell, that's an entirely different question. But the Jewish concept would be that you have to work on yourself, and that's it. And any good you do in the world is secondary to the work you do on yourself. Doesn't your motivation, Susan and Jack are right, doesn't your motivation for good behavior, doesn't your motivation for good behavior color the judgment of the behavior? I think that's right. I think that's right. All right, let me show you. This one is my favorite clip, actually, of the 6 I'm going
Rabbi?
to. This is number 5. Yes, Allie?
Can I? Yeah, sorry, I was going to type it, but it would just take a really long time.
Go ahead.
The comment about the YouTubers that do, like, it made me think of this YouTuber my son really loves called Mr. Beast, who does tons of charity. He'll buy out entire stores and donate it to like homeless shelters. And what I think is interesting, having watched a lot of his stuff and seen some of his behind the scenes things, is his goal was to be famous so that he could have money to be able to do the charitable things. So I just wanted to put that out there, like that the motivation can be altruistic in the end, even if it isn't. Yeah, sorry.
No, not at all. Do not apologize for that. That's wonderful.
That's a good point.
Yeah, it's a great point. For me, this issue of motivation, the heart of it for me is that when we look around us and we see the people that we share this community with, it is ultimately impossible for us to know what's in their heart and for us to know the trajectory of their lives. So it could be that someone's motivation starts out from a negative place, but that they grow through the experience. They learn about themselves, and they could be in a very good place. I'll give you a good example of this. I think I may have shown this video in another class, but there was this wonderful video that talked about the process of teshuvah. That is the process of returning and turning and repenting. And it was talking about Madoff, actually. It was in a fictional sense. And the person who had embezzled all these funds and ruined lives, hundreds of lives, had killed himself. And the video was a son and a father, and they were talking about it. The son was saying, "Good riddance, like let him die. That's great." And the father was saying, "No, you can't wish for his death, and here's why: because he has cut off the potential for teshuvah for himself. Can he ever replace the money? No, he can never make that right. Could he work and dedicate his life to make it better? Maybe, and he could still fail at that. But the thing that happened because he died was he was no longer able to better himself. And that process of teshuvah is central. And you will never know it about another person. I don't know it about the YouTuber that you're talking about. That would be between him and his maker. And that's the judgment, that's the gauge. Okay, another video. Susan, is that you? Go ahead. Let's unmute you there.
Okay, so I'm just having a little trouble with the tension here. So the tension I'm having is because I studied Maimonides with you in Torah Talk, right? So we had the scales of justice, right? And we had at length conversations about teshuvah and the purpose of teshuvah and the purpose of the scales of justice is for us. It's for this growth. It's for, and the thought of a better place or of a heaven and a hell didn't matter because we don't know it and we can't count on it, but we can count on our name, knowing before whom we stand, whether it be ourselves, our community, our family, God, whatever. we have to continue to grow, to improve. And the point you made about being average, being equal, and having that next action for Bernie Madoff, for everyone, being able to turn and to change and to grow, being our salvation. And in this show for this girl too, one act, and she could be at her 1.2 million in our faith, right? Because she would have learned, and she would have intrinsically, she would have seen the light. She would have. So I am, filled with tension for this girl, because that's a huge number. But if she were Jewish, it could be very quick for her. We could coach her. She could come
Well,
to Torah Talk and we could coach her. So
just come to Torah Talk. That's it, right?
I get it. Read Maimonides. So I'm kind of struggling with, this. It doesn't really matter people's motivation to all these comments. So somehow, just by doing the act, you kind of learn. It's by mentoring. That's why we teach our children tzedakah. It's like, we're going to kind of guide you through this so that you learn to feel the feeling, and the feeling becomes part of who you are. And it doesn't really matter what else happens. If you make the world a better place and there is a heaven, great. It's a win-win. But if there isn't, you got to feel heaven on earth while you were here. So I'm struggling with this tension, and I'm dying for this poor girl, because 1.2 million, I'm going to have trouble with this show. So
No, you're gonna love it. I'll tell you what happens in the episode.
Okay.
She tries hard to make things right with every person that she's offended, but none of it ultimately gets her points at all.
But
And she realizes, wait a minute, hold on a second. She realizes at the end of the episode that the problem is her motivation. And in an instant, she changes her motivation. She says, the only thing that I can do is leave. I have to be willing to recognize my sin and to leave the good place. And immediately her points are, I don't know, up to 1.2 million or higher.
So
She
it's just
immediately earns the points as soon as the motivation changes.
self-knowledge. So, right, which would be right in line with Maimonides.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm feeling a little better.
Yeah.
Still kind of tense, I have to tell you.
I think that kind of response of the show, the fact that the show played it out that way, that was what was so exciting for me, because it makes it much more real. It's not about the actions. It's not about, one example was a woman was on flying day. She was flying around at 1,000 miles an hour, and it started raining down turkeys, and she hit a turkey carcass going 1,000 miles an hour. And it was Eleanor's fault. Just trying to give you a sense of the show if you haven't watched it. You can't apologize for someone hitting a turkey carcass at 1,000 miles an hour. There's just no card. There's no Hallmark card for that. And she apologizes and she tries to make it right, and it's not right. And so ultimately, she has to change herself internally, and instantly that changes. Does she make it right with the person that she's hurt? Not really. That is done. It's done already, but she still has the potential to change herself. Jill asked about the Maimonides class. Every summer, we have taken on a book to prepare ourselves for the High Holy Days. And that was several years ago now. That was the book that we looked at, Hilchot Tshuva. Love to do that again. It might be time to do that again. We'll see. This summer, I don't think I can. I've already got another book planned. All right, so let me show you the next clip. We are quickly coming to the end of our time here, and I've got two more clips I really am hoping to show you. And actually, this is a perfect setup, okay? So this is Eleanor, I think, realizing that what's at stake here is not the number of points based on action, but her motivation, that it's her motivation that has to change if she wants to stay here. So she starts the scene by deciding she has to leave, and she's sneaking out. She's sneaking out of the room. And ultimately, she decides that she doesn't want to do that, that she wants to learn how to change her motivation. I think I've set that up enough. One second, let me set it up here. All right, can you hear the clips? Are they loud enough? Is it working? Okay. Here is the next clip. This is mostly season. I have to tell you one other thing about this. So we have basically covered season 1, and the big reveal at the end of season 1 that I will now ruin for you is that this is actually not the good place at all. Actually, this is an experiment that is led by Michael the demon to try to actually torture them. And the problem is that these human beings, who everyone in the underworld has written off as just helpless because we're human beings and we're weak and we sin, we keep surprising them. And the human beings continue to improve every time. And so the experiment fails. It fails again. And in this point, what they've realized is that it's been like 800 reboots or more. And the humans keep improving. They keep overcoming. They keep finding each other and improving as human beings. So that's the setup here. But in this moment, Eleanor is done. So season 2.
But look at what you're asking me to do. Make a deal with an actual devil so that I can then do homework in secret. And by the way, you're not my friends, man. We've known each other for like a week.
You know it's more than that. We've been through some version of this 800 different times. And who cares that it's only been a week? How long do you have to know someone before you do the right thing?
9 weeks minimum.
Okay.
Look, bro, I don't owe you anything. I gotta do what's right for me. You can come with me if you want. I got another mouth we can put in the bed.
Good luck.
I got a couple more questions.
Sure, take your time. We're not in a hurry or anything.
How many times in all the reboots did I ask Chidi for help, he refused to help me, and then I had to get better on my own?
Never. He always helped you.
Really?
Yep. No matter how I set it up, you found him, confessed you didn't belong, asked him for help. He said yes. Now, his agreeing to help was part of my plan. What wasn't part of my plan was it actually working. Drove me nuts. Pesky little nerd. Stuck with you and always helped you overcome your biggest problem.
Assuming that's my selfishness?
No. It's that you never found a haircut that framed your face properly. Yes, your selfishness.
She realizes that ultimately the goal of being human is to improve ourselves. And what that means is to turn our attention away from self-interest and learn to help other people. All right, I think for the sake of time, I'm going to move past that. We'll include that in another. Let's see. Okay, I'm just going to set up the last clip. That's what I think we should do with the biggest time here, the end of our time here. Ultimately, the show ends season 2 with this understanding that no, wait a minute. In this season 1, okay, sorry, there we go. The show ends season 2 with this understanding that in order to earn their place in this heaven, so to speak, they're going to have to, all of them, learn how to improve. This next clip is going to be them actually trying to explain that to Michael. Michael is the demon who is so moved by their efforts to improve themselves that he decides to help them. This is the ultimate lesson of humanity, though, that Michael, who is a divine being, does not understand. He says, how do you make these decisions about what is right and what is good? Because, well, you'll see, he does not have the framework for it. So let me show you this clip, and then I'll see if I can be more coherent about it.
Into your class, right?
Okay, so Chidi, the ethics and moral philosophy professor, has started a class, and all of the humans and Michael are in his class trying to learn how to be better people so that they can actually get to the good place. And it turns out that Michael is the hardest one to teach because he's not human. So we'll watch this clip. Here we go. He's taking the moral philosophy book that he's been given in the class and tearing out pages and using them for basketball practice.
Man, Michael is not into your class. Right now, I'm the best student. I'm gonna be the velociraptor.
You trying to say valedictorian?
No. Look, dude, this isn't your fault. You've been teaching him ethics for half an hour, and he's been evil since the beginning of time.
Oh, maybe the reason Michael can't latch on to the ideas is because he's immortal. Look, if you live forever, then ethics don't matter to you because basically there's no consequences for your actions. You tell a lie, who cares? Wait a few trillion years, the guilt will fade. Before I can teach Michael to be good, I have to force him to think about what we used to think about, that life has an end, and therefore our actions have meaning.
That's what you used to think about? I used to think about how it's weird. They don't make pants that are just one big pant leg for both your legs.
You mean a skirt?
No, you're not getting it, and my thing is different, so shut up.
Michael,
Yeah.
is there any way that you can die?
Yeah. Actually, there is. It's called retirement. It's rare, but when one of us really screws something up,
And what happens exactly?
well, it's fairly straightforward. My essence would be scooped out of my body with a flaming ladle, and every molecule in my body would be placed on the surface of a different sun.
Sure.
So is that what would happen if your boss found out that you defected to our side?
Yeah.
Okay, so that might actually happen. And if it did, there would be no more Michael. Think about that for a second. Imagine being retired. Everyone else is here, but you, poof, gone. Nothingness, inky, black void, done.
Okay, I'll think about that. Huh. So, you're saying I would be no me?
Okay, now we're getting somewhere.
Dude, you broke Michael.
No, this is good. He's having an existential crisis. It's a sort of anguish people go through when they contemplate the silent indifference of our empty universe. Look, the good news is, if he can work through this, it's the first step towards understanding human ethics.
And what if he can't?
Well, then he'll be a lifeless shell of misery forever, and we're all doomed. Okay, I will be right back. Gonna go grab some Camus.
I think that's perhaps my favorite line in the whole show. I'm going to go grab some Camus. Albert Camus, if you're not familiar, The Stranger, it's an amazing book. And it's about this, looking out into the empty void, not of space, but of time, recognizing that we do not know what comes next, but that it is the ultimate existential crisis, when at some point in your life you do realize that. I didn't get a chance to show you, but Michael follows up his existential crisis with the perfect midlife crisis. He shows up in like a fancy red sports car, and he's got a pierced ear, because that's what men do when they have their midlife crisis. I think I'll let you know. There are many questions that the show addresses. The show is going to ask us how we can live a good life. What are the limits to self-sacrifice in order to live that good life? Are goodness and happiness the same thing? We're going to ask, is life fair? And of course, we know the answer to that one is no. Is there judgment in the afterlife? They don't talk about God, they do talk about a judge. Is neutrality, that is the act of not choosing, is that evil? We know the quote from John Stuart Mill that the only thing required for evil to win is for good people to do nothing. Is that evil? It is falsely attributed to Edmund Burke and John F. Kennedy. By the way, that's John Stuart Mill. This is the beginning of an answer. And when you are confronted with this answer, what they're suggesting is that it's natural that you have an existential crisis, that you go into crisis mode. It begins with recognizing our mortality. And I think that is a very Jewish statement. We know that every year, as Jews, we are asked to contemplate our mortality. We go to Yom Kippur, and we are supposed to consider, as if it were happening that day, what the end of our life will be like. But it is not just to be morbid, it is for this same purpose, because only by recognizing our mortality are we then able to have a life full of meaning. And he kind of glosses over this, but what Chidi suggests is that if we were immortal, if we lived eternity, then there would be no ethics. That is a concept that will play out in other classes here, but also in the show. I'm giving you 2 weeks now. You can watch the whole show in 2 weeks. They're 20-minute episodes. So if you have not yet seen it, there's still time. We're going to start here, though, a building of human ethics, beginning with this recognition of mortality. And season 3 begins in the same way, with our humans, these experiment subjects, being asked to live again and to try to do a better job this time in their lives. Yes, Aaron writes, I love that there's no hesitation about how long it takes before she does the right thing. Eleanor has humor as her defense mechanism, right? So Chidi asks her a very important question. How long do you have to know someone before you do the right thing? And of course, the answer is you do the right thing regardless of how long you've known somebody. But her answer, of course, is humor. 9 weeks minimum, right? That's just a joke, and it's her defense mechanism. I also will just mention that in this clip, when they mention this idea of that they've been rebooted 800 times, that is the concept of reincarnation. But it also is something else. It's a concept, and this is where we're going to start the next class, actually, the concept of memory. They have all sorts of shared history, these two. And in fact, they have found each other over 800 different reboots. Against all odds, they keep finding each other. And that's why we cry at the end of the show, because it's the most romantic thing to think that you could go through 800 lives and you could still find your life partner. A soulmate is not, Michael at the beginning of the show, he pairs people up. Hey, this is your soulmate. And that's artificial. It doesn't really work that way. But in defiance of Michael, when Michael tries to keep them apart, he's torturing them, they keep finding each other. That's the true definition of a soulmate. So she will learn. She will learn in season 3 especially. All right, well, thank you all. I'm going to leave things there and stop recording for now.